The Alt-Lite consists of a wide variety of right-wingers who oppose mainstream conservatism. They share certain features with the so-called alt-right, but at the same time they want to distance themselves from the alt-right, and there are reasons for this. The alt-right is a white nationalist movement. The name was coined by Richard Spencer in 2008, and he is the central figure of the alt-right in the US. He opposes egalitarianism, multiculturalism, immigration and Jewish influence. He wants to establish a white ethno-state somewhere in North America, just for whites, not including Jews. Spencer does not deny a certain affinity with Adolf Hitler. After a speech given by Spencer in November 2016, where he quoted Nazi propaganda, some people associated with the alt-right distanced themselves from Spencer's remarks. This may be seen as the beginning of the alt-lite. Some of these people initially called themselves New Right, although they didn't coin the term. Spencer himself called other right-wingers protesting his involvement with a free speech rally in Washington, D.C. in June 2017 and organizing a competing rally on the same day, alt-lite, and said that they needed, quote, a good purge, end quote. Representatives of the alt-right have accused Breitbart News and Steve Bannon for diluting the alt-right ideology, calling them alt-lite. First, let's have a look at the similarities between the two groups. Both the alt-right and the alt-lite think we shouldn't be ashamed of our white inheritance and that there's a lot in it to celebrate and be proud of. Both support Donald Trump, oppose political correctness, feminism, the welfare state, illegal immigration and Islamization. So where do they differ? We've already hinted at the attitude towards Hitler. According to Gavin McInnes, who himself identifies as alt-lite, the alt-lite is inclusive and wants everyone to be friends, as long as you accept Western values. What he means is that the alt-lite rejects identity politics, like white nationalism and racialism. The alt-right, on the other hand, doesn't stress Western values, but whites, and they think the Jews have an undue influence, whereas the alt-lite don't care about the Jews. While blaming the Jews for all their problems, the alt-right criticize blacks for blaming whites for everything, McInnes says. According to Greg Johnson from the alt-right, the difference between his movement and the alt-lite is that the latter consists in civic nationalism, while the alt-right consists in racial nationalism. I believe another difference is the attitude towards authoritarianism. The alt-right are collectivists in a certain sense. They are authoritarian and want a strong leader, which makes them potentially skeptical towards democracy, whereas the alt-lite are individualists who stress freedom. Here in Germany, you could compare the alt-lite to the Alternative for Germany, or AfD, and the alt-right to the National Democratic Party, or NPD. Alexander Gauland, leader of the AfD, has stated that the basic difference between the two parties is that the NPD people admire Adolf Hitler, while the AfD people do not, and I think it's a fair description. Conservatives like Steven Crowder from Dallas, Texas, and Ben Shapiro from Los Angeles don't belong to the alt-right because they don't like Trump, McInnes says. In another video from 2016, he grouped these two as Cruz Cons, Christian conservatives, although Shapiro is an Orthodox Jew. Now let's talk very briefly about a few alt-lighters and their views. Laureen Southern is a Canadian liberal nationalist whom I've referred to before on this channel. She's been reporting on the slaughter of white farmers in South Africa, and she's been involved in activities together with identitarians Martin Sellner and Brittany Pettibone against illegal mass immigration to Europe. She's anti-feminist, anti-Islam and anti-mass immigration. Mike Chernovich is a Californian blogger, YouTube personality, author, filmmaker and radio host who calls himself New Right and American Nationalist and describes himself as being politically center-right. He is a masculinist and he thinks tolerance goes only one way, namely for non-whites, and that there is a white genocide going on in South Africa. However, he rejects white nationalism. Gavin McInnes, whom I quoted already, is a Canadian YouTuber and provocateur who is the founder of the men's group The Proud Boys. He now lives in New York City. He describes himself as a libertarian, but he wants the US to close its borders and let everyone assimilate to a Western, English-speaking way of life. He defends Judeo-Christian values as superior to all other values, and he has equated Islam with fascism. He strongly defends free speech, including hate speech. He has been criticized by the alt-right for refusing to promote the conspiracy theory that Jews control the world. Paul Joseph Watson is a British YouTuber who criticizes feminism, Islam and the left. He opposes modernist architecture and modern art. He used to describe himself as a libertarian, but in 2016 he said he had changed his mind and he has referred to himself as a conservative. He sees conservatism today as a counter-cultural movement, which is an interesting attitude. He supports Donald Trump and Marine Le Pen. In June this year, he joined the UK Independence Party. He is anti-immigration and anti-Islam, and he thinks that European culture is under threat due to the demographic change. Stéphane Molyneux is Canadian and one of the most important political YouTubers today, possibly the most important. I have referred to his videos many times on this channel. He's an anarcho-capitalist with conservative leanings on a number of issues like a critical stance towards feminism, mass immigration and Islam. He's a Trump supporter and he believes there is white genocide in South Africa. Brittany Pettibone from California is a science fiction writer and podcaster who calls herself American Nationalist. She's the fiancée of Martin Sellner, head of the Identitarians in Vienna. She's against mass immigration and she has objected to treating minorities better just because they are minorities. She rejects racism, white nationalism and other forms of identity politics, but she's skeptical towards multiculturalism. With Tara McCarthy, she runs a podcast where they encourage listeners to, quote, reconnect with the traditional values that once made Western civilization great, including but not limited to the glorification of the nuclear family, motherhood, masculinity, femininity, etiquette, traditional gender roles and love of one's own culture, race and country. Not bad. Pettibone has actively supported the identitarian movement's efforts to keep NGO boats of African refugees from reaching the continent in Europe. Jack Posobiec is a Trump supporter and a correspondent for the conservative television channel One America News Network. He calls his work reality journalism, a mix of investigation, activism and commentary. He's been accused of spreading conspiracy theories like Pizzagate. He rejects white nationalism and violence. On June the 25th, 2017, Posobiec organized the so-called Rally Against Political Violence in Washington, D.C. after learning that Richard Spencer would be speaking at the free speech rally there. Posobiec's rally was harshly criticized by Richard Spencer. Posobiec is anti-Islam and has sharply criticized and ridiculed the Muslim Brotherhood, which is Islamist. And then there's Milo Yiannopoulos, of course, the pedophilic super faggot of the right. But while Jack Donovan, another right-wing homosexual, openly identifies with the alt-right and makes videos where he consciously speaks in an unnaturally deep and threatening voice to seem, and I guess feel, manly, advocating tribalism, meaning that men should spend most of their free time in closed male groups. Yiannopoulos is a more complex character, and a bad boy provocateur who has managed to fool a lot of well-meaning people, including libertarians like Lauren Southern and Camille Paglia. He calls himself conservative and he strongly opposes political correctness, but probably more for being able to live out his own perversions than to save democracy. He's anti-mass immigration and anti-Islam, which is understandable, since in an Islamist state he would be executed immediately. He has criticized Black Lives Matter and transgender people. In fact, it's astonishing that Yiannopoulos does not identify as alt-right, although he's an admirer of Donovan's books on masculinity and tribalism, because of the simple fact that the alt-right is most certainly a gay ideology. Like the extreme left, it's authoritarian, and many or most gay people are to be found either on the extreme left or the extreme right. The reason for this is their feminine brains, because, as Jordan Peterson has explained, neuroticism is a typical female character trait. Fearful people tend to wish for strong protection. In the case of the left, it's the state, and for the extreme right, it's a strong leader. In this way, extreme leftists and extreme right-wingers hope to live out their feminine need for submission and possibly masochism. Authoritarian ideologies like communism and fascism are feminine, weak and gay, and opposed to the strong, free individual, because there is nothing that these deeply sick people fear more than personal responsibility and having to make your own decisions.